Handed you one. If you didn't get the booklet, raise your hand and somebody will put it in your hand. Okay, we got one right here, guys. One right there. You got one? There we go. Dee needs one in the... I have that color shirt too, and I never can remember what it's called. Fuchsia? What color, Mama? Okay, salmon. All right. All right, we'll pray and we'll get started. Y'all ready? All right. Father, God, we thank you for another day you've given us. God, I pray you open our ears, God, that we can hear what it is that you're saying to us today. Open our hearts, God, that we can receive. Lord, help us to live out, understand, and do exactly what you've called us to do in obedience. We love you and praise you. Be with Dr. Jeff this morning as he speaks and opens the Word, opens these tools that will help us and equip us to be better stewards. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, brother.
Mr. Clay, and such an honor to be at First Baptist Church Blanchard this morning, and been looking forward to being with y'all. I know we scheduled this probably about a year ago, and again, so honored to be here, and a beautiful area. And you might say, well, Jeff, who are you? So I'll tell you who I am, okay? Jeff Steed with the Louisiana Baptist Foundation. And I'll introduce the Foundation's ministry in just a moment, but thought I'd introduce my family first this morning. And so on the far left is Corey, our 19-year-old. He's over in the DFW area, freshman in college there, and works part-time at a church over that way. And then Shanna's actually with me this morning. We've been married almost 31 years as of August 24th, right? All right. And so we met at a Baptist church in Arlington, Texas, many years ago. And by the way, we live in the Alexandria area, or actually on the outskirts of Alexandria, a couple hours down the road, so not too far. And then, of course, this is a wedding picture, right? So Whitney got married about a year and a half ago. To Stephen. Stephen's a teacher and soccer coach at a school in Springtown, Texas, just west of Fort Worth. And then Whitney graduated from DBU last May and working as a children's minister at a church in Springtown as well. I always want to say Fort Worth. But yeah, so she's probably teaching at this moment as well. So she's kind of neat how God's using her and her ministry there. And so that's us. And so just thought I'd introduce us a little bit personally, but also share with you about the Foundation's ministry, about who we are. And by the way, let me give you a big picture for a moment. And thank you for what you do for a cooperative program. Literally, funds invested in the cooperative program. There's someone in the world today hearing the gospel because of cooperative program. So thank you for what you do. We are all a part of the Baptist family in Louisiana, of course, and you have the Louisiana Baptist Convention, and you have four ministries that are separate entities, but of course part of the convention. And those ministries are Louisiana Baptist Children's Home, not too far from here. And then you have Louisiana Christian University. It used to be Louisiana College in Pineville. You have the Baptist Message, which is the newspaper. And then you have Louisiana Baptist Foundation. And that's us, the foundation. And we're kind of behind the scenes of ministries in churches kind of all around the state, and love to do it. As you see on the screen there, we have the honor to manage money for churches and ministries and getting them more money on their money for the sake of what they're doing for the kingdom. And I wanted to just pause and thank you, First Baptist Church Blanchard, for the opportunity to partner in ministry with you. We have the honor to manage some funds for you. Thank you for that. And we're grateful for that. And then as well, manage other types of funds, long-term funds like endowments. And we have the honor to teach in churches quite a bit and love to do that, related to stewardship and legacy, and which we're obviously addressing this morning. And then some other areas we added last year with the church business administration services, with loans and payroll services and capital campaigns. So our ministry, again, we're kind of behind the scenes of churches. And we love what we do in partnering with churches all over the state. And we also work with individuals a lot. We have the honor just about every day to be working with someone in the state that wants to do something special for the kingdom, for their church or their ministries, and often financially beyond cash. And so we get to work with folks that give all different stocks and bonds, and we got our first Bitcoin call the other day. Somebody wanting to give Bitcoin to benefit their church, real estate and mineral interest. So we get to work with some great folks around the state that want to help their church in special ways. Estate gifts, so we're heavily involved in that. So yeah, just thought I'd kind of give you a big picture, kind of who we are. I also want to say thank you this morning. I want to pause also and say thank you for doing something a little different this morning. And I realize that this is during your Sunday school time, and we're going to lay a biblical foundation, by the way, in a moment for what we're addressing this morning. But I just wanted to say thank you. I often pray that when I'm going to be at a church, that God will use information to help individuals that are there and their families and potentially His kingdom. And so I prayed that this morning, and I really do pray that it's going to be helpful to you this morning as far as what we talk about. And so let's go ahead and kind of jump into it this morning. Our theme today is, Thus says the Lord, set your house in order. And the house that we're talking about relates to more of our states in that area. And it relates to every adult in the room, whether you're 20 in age or 100 in age, okay, or whatever age you are. It relates to all adults, okay? So, and again, the house we're talking about dealing with our estates and basically what God's blessed us with over the years. So this is what I want to accomplish in our brief time together this morning. I want to talk about how to set your house in order biblically. So again, we're going to lay a biblical foundation for the importance of this particular topic. We're going to talk about how to protect and provide for our families. There's a myth out there. In fact, there's a lady that came up to me before a session. This was a while back. And she said, Jeff, I know where you're at my church. And she said, and what you're going to be talking on, and I'm not sure if I need that. And I said, well, tell me a little bit more. And she said, well, I've told my family everything I want done when I get to go to heaven one day. And I was real nice about it, but I said it doesn't matter. In Louisiana, it has to be in writing. It has to be in writing through our wills. And otherwise, it's up to the state of Louisiana related to, and they have a default will, basically. For folks that don't have one, they have a default will. I read it the other day, not the most exciting reading, okay? But it would probably not accomplish what 99% of us in the room would want to accomplish. So I think it's so important as believers to be good stewards, have plans in place related to what God's blessed us with, and to be proactive in that, okay? And so we'll talk a bit more about that. How to control the distribution of your assets, we'll talk about that. How to reduce or eliminate taxes. And then in addition to your family, how else to make a legacy, how else to make a benefit on the kingdom through your church or other ministries you have a passion for. So that's kind of where we're heading this morning, okay? And by the way, if you're a note person, there are some workbooks. Pastor Clay mentioned them earlier. Anybody need one? Okay. So if you're, like I said, I'm kind of a note person, so I always like to provide these. There's actually an outline on the inside cover there. And I'm kind of an outline person too, so that may help you, okay, as we kind of go through some notes this morning. Also on the back, on the bottom right, is my name and also Jerry Love. Jerry's been with us 25 years as head of gift planning at the foundation, and any way we can help you as a resource. We are a free resource to you because of a cooperative program. So our ministry is literally helping folks on a daily basis that want to do something special or just have questions. Again, we're a free resource to you. And so our number and email is on there. And I will tell you that when somebody contacts us, we are very private, very confidential with who contacts us. So just know that is there as a resource to you. And you may need us next week. You may need us 2 years from now. So I just encourage you to keep our information maybe in a file for you, file folder, and that way you can grab it when you need us in the future. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. Before we get to our biblical foundation, I want to give you 2 definitions because I'm going to use these over and over during our session. One is called estate. Now, some of you are thinking, well, Jeff, that's what I have when I get to go to heaven one day, right? It's true, okay? But it's also everything you have right now. Everything that God has blessed you with is called your estate, okay? It's your real estate and bank accounts and insurance and retirement accounts. It's just everything you have. And by the way, it's not something we think about every day, right? And when you start thinking about all we have, we realize that God's blessed us, right? There's probably not a person in the room that's ever truly, truly been in need. Think about that for a moment. God provides for whatever we need in life, and we're so grateful for that. And so sometimes working through this process, it brings a sense of gratitude that comes across us, just thinking about all that God's blessed us with and to be thankful for that. The other definition I want to give to you, and I don't have a screen for it, but what it is basically called probate, or in Louisiana, we call it what? Somebody? Succession, right? And so what that is basically, and we have in Louisiana, we have a pretty efficient system as far as probate or called succession. And it's basically if Jeffrey Wayne Steed, okay, went to heaven today, my will goes through probate or succession, which is a court process that makes sure that everything that's in that will is accomplished. There are some folks that want to avoid probate and so forth. I actually like it because it makes sure that everything that's in that will is done and done in an orderly fashion. And so, like I said, we have a pretty efficient system in Louisiana. Any estate planning attorneys in the room by chance? Anybody? I was going to ask them to testify to that, but we have a pretty efficient system here, thankfully. And so, that's and I'm going to talk about probate or succession a little bit. But some of you are probably familiar with it because you've been the executor for a family member that maybe has passed on. And so, but again, I'll talk about that a little bit more, but wanted to give you those two different definitions in the very beginning. So let's lay a biblical foundation, okay, related to the importance of what we're talking about here this morning. I'm going to give you 4 biblical principles, okay? And the first is this: we should set our house in order. Now, this has to do with a verse over in Isaiah 38:1. And it may have been a while since you've been over in this part of Scripture. And so let me lay some groundwork here, okay? So God told prophet Isaiah, I want you to go to the king, and I want you to tell the king that he's about to pass on. Now, anybody remember the king's name? Was somebody? Hezekiah. Man, this is impressive, Clay. I have the honor to be in quite a few churches, and it is rare that somebody remembers that name. So kudos to whoever said that. But it's Hezekiah, right? King Hezekiah. And so God told prophet Isaiah, go to King Hezekiah and to tell him that he's about to pass on. Now, back then, kings had a lot of power, right? A lot of power. And like they could do whatever they wanted to, or whatever, right? They wanted to an individual. Really. I mean, they had that type of power. And so if I had been, back in the day, if I had been Isaiah that God told me to go to the king, I might be a little timid with that or hesitant because I don't know how the king's going to respond, right? I mean, you really don't. And to this type of news. But I feel like I know Isaiah just a little bit from his personality in Scripture. And I don't think Isaiah hesitated at all. I think he went straight to the king and let it be known, right? As far as that this king was about to pass on. And so because of that, King Hezekiah had a heads up, right? That he was about to pass on. Probably got some plans in place pretty quickly, being the king of a nation, right? And so he had a heads up, but most of us don't have a heads up, right? When we're going to heaven, which I think is a good thing typically. But because of that, we need to have plans in place, okay, to protect our family and also to leave legacy to what we want to impact in our life. And so James reminds us of how short-term we are on this earth. He says that, yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. Just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. You know, you've heard the phrase before, we're just passing through, right? And we really are, in the grand scheme of all time. I like to think of it like this. So think about an eternal timeline, okay? An eternal timeline. So over here is the beginning of all time. Before God created anything, the beginning of all time. And now follow that timeline over here. And at the end of that timeline, remember back in math class a few years ago, that sideways 8, which is what? infinity, or I like to think of eternity. So that's the eternal timeline, right, of all time. Now, your earthly life, my earthly life, might show up as a little bitty dot on that timeline. Think about that, right? If it even shows up, right, in the grand expanse of all time. And again, we are just passing through, and we just need to make sure that we've got plans, again, accordingly related to what God's blessed us with and to protect our families. And so this picture right here is an analogy related to 70% of Americans. So 70% of Americans, it doesn't matter income level, it doesn't matter where you live in the nation, it doesn't matter age. 70% of Americans across the board do not have estate plans in place, okay? And so part of what I want to encourage you to do, if you're in that 70%, I just want to encourage you to get that done, and again, to protect your family. And if you're in the 30%, and we're going to talk in a minute about how to do that, okay? But if you're in the 30% that has a will done, I want to encourage you to think about, does it accomplish everything you want done, right? Things change sometimes, right? Within our families, otherwise, there's sometimes changes that need to be made. So just I want to encourage you to think through that as we go through the session today. I want to give you another biblical principle. We're to honor God with all that we have, and we'd all agree with that, right? We're to honor God with all that we have. Everything we have is from Him, right? So we're managers, we're stewards over every single item under our possession, right? And so part of what Proverbs reminds us of, Proverbs 3:9, says, honor the Lord with your wealth and from the first of all your produce. Now, that word wealth, so honor the Lord with your wealth. Remember a while ago we defined the word estate, remember? You can actually theologically plug that in here because it's what you have, right? So read it from that standpoint. Honor the Lord with your estate from the first of all your produce. Now, the first of all your produce, we get that real easily, right? Because we know from other scriptures that that's dealing with what? Right? The tithe, right? Giving 10% to the Lord's work, right? To our church for the sake of impacting what's going on in that church, in that community, for the sake of reaching people with the gospel. So we get that easily, but sometimes, and I'll be honest with you, I've forgotten the first part of it, okay? Because we're to honor the Lord with everything we have, right? And so this can even, if we really take this to heart, this can even start impacting buying decisions, right? Think about that for a moment. If everything we have is from God, right? And we're managers over that, we're stewards over that, and we're to be honoring Him in what we do. I think it's important, especially in major purchases, to at least pray about that and see if we'd be honoring Him through that scenario. So honoring the Lord with what we have and from the first of all your produce. Now, of course, this is a direct feed-in, I believe, related to also when we leave this earth one day, as far as our estate, as far as what God's provided to us, right? How are we honoring Him through that, through all those assets one day? There's a quote that I want to give to you, and I'll tell you why I'm making it, okay, in just a moment. But let me read it. As believers in the room today, right? As followers of Jesus Christ in the room today, the most significant stewardship decision of our life will likely take place through our will. And you're saying, Jeff, why are you saying that, right? Well, for most of us, the largest personal transfer of wealth will occur when we step into heaven one day, okay? And now, that may be $10, that may be $10 million, whatever it is, okay? The largest personal transfer for most of us will be when we pass away one day into heaven. So now I have folks tell me periodically, well, Jeff, I'm going to spend it all on retirement. You know, I might leave the kids a few bucks, but I'm going to spend it all, right? And you've seen on the back of the bumper sticker of the RV going down the interstate, down I-49, you know, you've seen the bumper sticker, right, that says, I'm spending my kids' inheritance, right? You've seen that? But I'm telling you that that's not what happens in the great majority of the time. And the reason is this. What's the number one fear in America for those in retirement? The number one fear in America for those in retirement is what? That's it. Running out of money. That is the number one fear. So if you're tempted to have that fear once in a while, no, you're not alone, okay? The majority of Americans in retirement, that's their fear. So what happens when we retire one of these days is basically we become very conservative with our budgets. Okay, that's what happens. And so typically we're living off, we might have some Social Security, we might have some pension coming in, we have maybe some investments that we're taking the income off of that. So that principle or corpus of what we have is typically even sometimes growing in retirement years, even as we take the income off. And you might say, Jeff, that doesn't make sense. I know. But because of fear of running out of money, we become very conservative with what we have. And so for most of us, the largest personal transfer of wealth, our estate, will occur when we get to go to heaven one day, which means what? As believers, the most significant stewardship decision of our life will likely take place through our will. So that's why it's so important, to make sure we've got good plans in place, no matter the age. Again, you may be 20 or 100 in the ring. But again, just making sure we've got those plans in place related to what God's blessed us with. Biblical principle number 3, we're to provide for our families. And we know the importance of that, right? I want to stress for a moment, though, if you have minor children in the room, I want really, if you're in charge, and by the way, one of the trends I'm seeing in America today is sometimes grandparents become the legal guardian of children because of different family dynamics. And so let me just say this. If you are legally responsible for a minor child, somebody below the age of 18, I really want to encourage you to get a will done for a couple of reasons. One is a guardianship issue, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the other is to make sure they have what they need financially, right? If something happened to us. And so that's so important. Also, just about every audience I have the honor to speak to, there's at least 1 or 2 in the room that have a special needs adult child. And it is so important to make sure you've properly provided for them in your will. If that's your scenario, I encourage you to reach out to Jerry Lovera. Again, our contact information's on the back there. It's really, really important that your will is set up in the proper way. What happens is if a special needs adult child, and most of the time they're on government assistance, right? And so SSI and so forth. So what happens if they were to inherit suddenly, they could be disqualified from all that, okay? Which is pretty important. And so just side note, holler at Jerry or me, and we can talk to you more about that. But again, any family member that might be dependent upon you. I worked with a lady a few years ago, and she said, well, my mom is in a destitute situation financially. She has nothing. And she's impoverished. She is depending upon me. This is the daughter talking, okay? She said, she's depending upon me literally for a livelihood, for food and whatever else. And she asked me, should I put my mom in my will? I said, absolutely, okay? Anybody that is legitimately dependent upon you, we need to make sure they're properly cared for in that will. I'm going to give you a verse, and I want to put a disclaimer on it in the very beginning. Paul was not talking about estate planning, okay, in this verse. But I believe generally we can apply it, okay? So it's found over in 1 Timothy. As you know, 1 Timothy was a letter written to Timothy from Paul. Paul was mentoring and coaching Timothy in the faith. And these are some words in 1 Timothy 5:8 that Paul gave to Timothy. He said, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Pretty strong words from Paul, right? Of course, you know from his personality in Scripture that he came across that way, right? But again, it does remind us of the importance of making sure that we care for our families, right? Especially those that would be dependent upon us if something happened to us. I want to give you one more biblical principle, and we're to be generous with the blessings that God gives to us, okay? And we'd all agree with that, right? We're to be generous with the blessings that God gives to us. And, you've heard the phrase before that God often blesses so that what? Can be a blessing to the people in His church and His kingdom, right? That's actually scriptural. And it's found over in 2 Corinthians 9:11. Preached on this a while back. And this is a powerful verse, by the way, if you start digging into it. But it says, you'll be enriched, again, 2 Corinthians 9:11. You'll be enriched in everything for all liberality, which through us is producing thanksgiving to God. Now, let's break that down. I want to focus on the first two lines of that. And you'll be enriched. What's another word for enriched? Blessed, right? And so you'll be blessed in everything for, what's another word for liberality? Generosity, right? So you'll be enriched, you'll be blessed in everything for all generosity. Think about the significance of that. So that phrase, again, you've heard over the years, God often blesses so we can be a blessing to the people in His church and His kingdom. It's actually scriptural there. And, I was thinking through this verse a while back, as far as the significance of it. And, I always ask the why question, why, what's the significance of that? Why is it there? Just to help me kind of process it mentally. And I believe one of the reasons that God blesses so that we can be generous to other people in His church and His kingdom is because Christ left the earth approximately 2,000 years ago, right? And when He left the earth, He left the responsibility to you and I to be His hands and feet, right? And so, it may be tomorrow or in coming days that God may speak to you and say, hey, remember that neighbor that's struggling right now financially? Or maybe somebody in the church or somebody you work with or whatever. But God may want to use you to be His hands and feet, to show compassion, right? And again, so generosity is like a tool that God uses to express His compassion, His generosity through us, right, to people in need sometimes, and in His church and His kingdom. And I was thinking about this whole verse as well, and the idea about estate planning and that whole area. Think about what estate planning is. At the heart of it, we leave earth, we're enjoying heaven, and basically at the heart of it is after all the bills and debts are paid, that's done away with first. But what's left is distributed out generously, right, to whoever we want to benefit. That's part of our privilege in having a will, right? So at the heart of it is generosity through that will to benefit our family that we want to benefit and potentially ministries we want to benefit. At the heart of estate planning is this whole idea of generosity. And so those are 4 biblical principles I wanted to give to you. And one of the ones I really want you to remember is that this whole idea of estate planning is stewardship related to what God's blessed us with and honoring Him with it. And so now we're going to jump into the logistics, like how do you make it happen, right? And like I said, if you have a will done, I want you to think about also, does it accomplish everything you want accomplished, right? And so let's jump into this. So a question I would get really, really often from people is Jeff, summarize it for me. What do people typically have, right, related to documents? So I finally did a slide on it, and it's this slide. So if you have a complex scenario, there could be some additional documentation, okay? And we can talk to you about that. But for the most part, I'd say 95% of the time, these are the basic documents people tend to have. Last will and testament. Testament means testimony. Our last testimony when we leave this place one day is right there in print as far as what's important to us, expressing our values as far as what's been important to us during our life. I'm going to come back to the will, okay? Second item that people tend to have is called a durable power of attorney over finances. Now, a durable power of attorney is valid only while you're living. In all likelihood, there are several people in the room that are durable power of attorney, maybe for a parent or for a sibling or whoever. And this is a document you may not ever need, but it's so important to have, okay, to help protect us and our families. So I'm going to use me. And by the way, I realize some of what we're talking about here today is not the easiest thing to think about, but I encourage you to think about it to help protect your family, okay? And so a power of attorney, so let's say Jeffrey Wayne Steed went into a coma today, okay? I'm incapacitated, I can't handle my own financial affairs, that type of thing. So what happens? Well, a power of attorney, the agent is the person, okay? But the durable power of attorney agent is able to step on my shoes and be me for all practical purposes. They can pay the bills, anything financially. They can pay the bills. They can do whatever they need to keep things rolling. 2 weeks later, I come out of that coma. Everything's good, right? And things just continue as normal at that point. But it's somebody that can step in your shoes if something happened, right? So that's a really important document. But again, the power ends when someone passes away. Okay, really important. Because who picks up at that point? the executor of the will, right? Okay. So the third document is a power of attorney over medical. It's the same idea. If I can't make decisions medically, my power of attorney agent can step in my shoes and be me to make those decisions. And it can be different, and it's usually a different document than the financial one, but it can be the same person if you want it to be. And so the fourth document, now these others are customized towards an individual, right? They're personalized documents. The fourth is usually a form. And if you've been in the hospital lately, they probably asked for this. It was just a few years ago. I still remember very vividly. But I rolled over to Shanna about 4 a.m. in the morning, approximately, and I said, I've got to go to the hospital. And I thought I was dying. I had no idea. I've never experienced pain like that in my life. And by the way, kidney stones, you want to avoid those things. You do not want one of those, okay? But we get to the hospital, and which is about 5 minutes down the road, and they give me like 53 pages to fill out. Remember, I feel like I'm dying. I don't know what's going on. And on those approximate 53 pages, one of the questions on there is what? Do you have a living will, right? And a lot of times, even if you go in for a test now, they'll ask for that. And it's basically a form that you filled out that basically says, okay, doctor, if I can't make certain decisions, this is what I want done or not done, okay? It's like a letter to your doctor. Think about that. And a lot of times people will give a copy even to their doctor, so they'll have that on file, okay? That's pretty common. So those are the 4 documents people tend to have. Now, I told you I'd circle back to the will, so let's talk about that. Some of you that have a will, you know it's several pages long, right? And those that don't, you've at least seen one, maybe from a parent or somebody else. They're multiple pages long. I'll tell you this morning, though, that about 95% of that will is boilerplate or template language. Now, it's important, okay, for it to be in there. But I'm just saying about 95% of that's in all wills. What we get to personalize is about 5% of that. And I'm going to tell you those 3 areas that are pretty typical. One is who's executor. Who's the quarterback over the estate process? You know, you're in heaven, enjoying heaven at the time, but your executor is over here, managing your will, okay? And they are, again, the quarterback over that will. And so, and you always want to back up, by the way. You always want to back up, okay, in that document. But the executor, they are legally responsible to follow everything that's in that will. Every T that is crossed, every I that is dotted. They are legally responsible. So that's the first part of the will that we personalize. Second part, and it may or may not relate to you, but if you are in charge of a minor child, it is so important to have guardians in there. And so, by the way, if you have children that are minors, or you have grandchildren that are minors, encourage your kids to get a will done, okay? It is so important in Louisiana. Let me just talk about that for a minute. So I had a young mom, a single mom, come up to me. This is a while back. She said, "Jeff, I've already told a family member I want to take care of. I think it's her daughter. If something happened to me, and I told her I admire you for that, because a lot of parents just don't think through that. But I encourage them. But I told her, it doesn't matter though. You've got to have it in a will for the state to recognize that. Otherwise, if somebody passes away, a parent passes away without a will, and they have minor children, it's up to the state of Louisiana who's going to raise the child. Okay? So one of the things, now I'll tell you that the state of Louisiana sometimes wants to find a family member to play that role. Okay? But it may or may not be the family member that you want raising your children. You know what I mean by that? You want to think about a guardian that at least shares your same values. Are they believers? Would they raise your kids in a Christian home? That's what I'm trying to get to. And so part of I think part of our responsibilities as parents is to make sure that we've got that will, okay? And I've had folks in their 20s tell me before, "Jeff, we don't have much at this point, but we have children." I said, "You need a will, okay? You need a will." And so that's on the second item related to the will, right? So we personalize executor, we personalize guardians. Thirdly, it's kind of the fun part, who do you want to benefit one day, right? Who do you want to surprise one day? And family members, maybe somebody in the room today, but whatever it is, right? That's part of our privilege in making sure that we do that. The way it usually occurs is all the last bills and debts are paid. They're done away with, okay? After that, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but after that, basically, the what's left is called either the residue or residuary. All that means is what's left after the bills and debts are paid, okay? And that's usually distributed based on percentages, okay? A question I get pretty often is, Jeff, do I have to list everything I have in my will? No, not at all. Okay, that's a great question, but you don't have to do that, right? And wills are pretty simple usually. And again, they say after all the bills and debts are paid, distribute based on percentages to these people and ministries that we want to impact. That's basically what it says. And now once in a while, we'll work with somebody that they'll say, well, Jeff, we've got this family farm, and we want it to go to a certain family member or whatever. So you'd put that in there too, okay? So all the bills and debts are paid, then that property is distributed, specific property, or maybe a ring or whatever it is. And then what's left, again, is called the residuary, and that's what's distributed usually based on percentages, okay? That add up to 100%, of course. And so that's typically how it works. So again, out of all the pages of a will, right? Again, 95% of that's just about in all wills. What we personalize typically is who's the executor, who's going to help be over the kids as far as parents over the kids if something happened to us. And then thirdly, who do you want to benefit? Okay? So that's basically what's in the will. There's a myth out there that estate planning has to be complex and all this. It doesn't. It doesn't at all. It can be a very simple process. And so let me talk about some individuals involved in estate. And I've talked about most of these. I've talked about executor, having to do with the will. Talked about agents, that has to do with that power of attorney. Remember, the power of attorney is valid only while you're living, okay? Thirdly, guardianships we've talked about. Fourthly, let me talk about trust for a minute. There's multiple types of trust out there, but the two primary ones I want to discuss just briefly this morning is one is called for children, okay? Now, if you have a will already, you probably have language in there already that says, if any of my beneficiaries are below the age of, and whatever number you want to use, 18 or 21 in age, or whatever age, basically that goes into a trust, right? And their parent can be in charge of it or somebody else. But that person in charge of it is called the trustee or manager. And so basically they're responsible to make sure that whatever money that that minor child needs for maintenance, which has to do with food and clothing and all that, medical bills or education, that they can use it. They can tap into that trust for that child, right? That's a minor. And then when they get to that age that you put in your will, then they inherit the rest. Okay? That's basically how it works. I know I have minor on there, but these are often used also for adult children. I'm going to give you a case study. That's the way my mind works. And this was a couple, by the way, we're very private again, very confidential. So I'm generalizing this case study, but there's a couple that met with at one point, and they said, Jeff, we have two children. I was with him and his wife. And they said, we have two children, and if we both passed away today and our children inherited from us, one of them would have their inheritance 30 years from now because they're a saver, right? Which is a blessing. The other would have it spent on Amazon this afternoon, okay? And that type of thing happens, by the way, to where it's just blown, right? And so part of what I want to encourage you to do is to think about who do you want to benefit one day and their financial maturity, okay? You know what I mean by that as far as are they good with money, that type of thing. And if they're not, and you feel like it could potentially be a dangerous scenario for them, because an inheritance can do more harm than good. An inheritance can do more harm than good if it's not distributed in the right way. So like with this couple that gave me that story, what they ended up doing, which I thought was very wise, is they gave some percent to each child outright when mom and dad was going to pass away, right? There were, I think, 2 or 3 ministries, including their church, they wanted to help as well through their estates. Those were in there, a certain percent. But everything else was going to a trust for these 2 children that were adults. And the way they set it up, and people have a lot of flexibility, the way they set it up is over 10 years. So it's distributed over 10 years, the rest of that estate. So if John, I'll just pick that name out, okay? If John blew all of his the first year quickly, well, he's partially protected because he's going to get some the second year and the third year and the fourth year up until, like with this couple, up until 10 years. And so that can be a very wise way, okay? And now, I have folks that at some point have told me, Jeff, I don't have much. It doesn't matter, how I distribute it. But I don't think that's the question. I think the question is this. Is that child that's going to inherit from you, potentially, or family member, are they used to dealing with that amount of money? So it's not actually leaving them, but it is the amount of money. There are some kids that would struggle with $2,000. And there were some that would struggle with $10 million, okay? But see, you just want to think about the financial maturity level of folks inheriting, and you just plan accordingly, right? And these trusts might be helpful to you. And they're pretty easy to, you can actually have that language in your will. So it's not a real complex scenario. The other part, you see that revocable living trust? That word revocable, and by the way, this is a totally different type of trust, okay? That word revocable, all that means is changeable, okay? So while you're living, you can change it, right? It's like a will scenario. And the main purpose of these, and there's probably 3 or 4 folks in the room that have one. They're pretty common. And the main purpose of these is to avoid probate or succession. And you're saying, well, Jeff, a while ago you said it was pretty efficient in Louisiana, right? The great majority of the time. And I did say that. Where we see people use these is when they have property in multiple states, okay? So let's say you've got a house here in Blanchard or in Louisiana somewhere, and you've got some property maybe you've got a family farm in East Texas that you've inherited, or you got some mineral interest you inherited, or whatever. Every state that you have real estate, it goes through probate in that state, okay? That's where it gets a little messy on the executor. That's where it gets a little expensive on the estate, and that any expense, you're just reducing what's going to be going out to family and ministries you have a passion for. So one of the ways that people do that, avoid probate, is anything in these revocable or changeable living trusts, it just avoids probate. That's its purpose, okay? If you want to talk more on that, just call us, and we can do that. Jerry or I can talk to you quite a bit more about that. All right, so what I want to do is I want to talk about something really popular for a minute, okay? Taxes, but it's important, related to the state. And so there's 2 different types of taxes typically involved with the state. One is called estate tax, and some people call it the death tax, you know. But, and this is federal, okay? This is on the federal side. And so the exemption this year in 2022, you see the number up there, right? Over $12 million exemption. So if you're below that in your state and you passed away, you're in good shape. And it's double if you're married, right? And so if Shannon and I passed away this year, we'd be in great shape, okay? We would not have an estate tax. Now, most of us, and I'll tell you this, if about 97% of Americans passed away this year, we would owe no estate tax, okay? So it's about that 3% that are above that as far as on a national level. And so, most, and let me make this note. We have worked with folks that are above that level, and there's some very effective ways to avoid estate tax legally, of course. And so, but I'll tell you that most of us would not be impacted by that if we passed away this year. Not to add complexity, but in the year 2025, this is going to change. We don't know what Congress is going to do. They don't know what they're going to do. That's not a priority for them right now. There's other things on the plate. And so we don't know what they're going to do. But I encourage people in planning, estate planning, just like with other planning of life, we can only plan upon today, right? The facts of today. right? So I encourage people to plan to have those in place. And then if something crazy happened in 2025, just make adjustments as you need to with your plans, okay? Most of us, again, would not be impacted by the first one, estate tax, but most everybody in the room or our heirs will be impacted by the second one called IRD tax. Most everybody in the room has a retirement account, okay? It may be an IRA, and I'm talking traditional, not Roth, okay? So a traditional IRA, you may, if you're a teacher, is I believe a 457 is what they call it. If you're a minister, it's a 403B. If you're in the corporate world, it's usually a 401k, whatever initials you want to use, okay? They all work the same way. They grow tax deferred all these years, right? And then when we turn what age, we have to start pulling money out? 72. It used to be 70 and a half. And Congress made the change to where it's 72 now. And so if you turn 72 this year, you'll probably start getting, wherever your IRA is at, or retirement account, you're probably going to start getting a notice saying, hey, you got to take out a certain amount of money this year. And it's called, what's it called? RMD, or Required Minimum Distributions, okay? And so it impacts just about everybody in the room that's 72 or higher, because most of us have one of those retirement accounts. And by the way, let me make a quick side note that may be helpful. I had a lady that met with, this is a while back, and she said, Jeff, I'm turning 72. The government's making me pull money out of my IRA. I'm not happy with that. I don't want to pay tax on it. Because again, when you start pulling money out, it's taxed, the traditional, because the government doesn't forget it's tax deferred, right? And so she said, what are my options? And I said, well, so I asked her about how much she gave to her church and ministries every year. She gave me that number. And then I said, so how much is the government wanting you to take out this year in that required minimum distribution? It happened to be about the same amount. So I said, instead of using your checking account bucket to write a check to the church, use your IRA bucket. Because when money leaves that IRA bucket that goes directly to, let's say, a church, and that's usually on a form now to where you can give it to charity if you want. But whatever goes out to a church, for example, out of a traditional IRA, there's no tax. So you literally just bypass the tax. And you're just changing buckets. You're already tithing. You're already giving. You're just changing the buckets. And so like with her and her scenario, she's going to save several $100s a year by just changing the bucket she's giving out of. That's a really effective way. If you have questions on that, call Jerry or me, and we can talk to you about that. It's an easy thing to do, okay? And so anyway, just a side note, and I've had two different people in sessions like stand up or raise their hand and say, hey, Jeff, you need to tell people about that. And I've had it on my slide, I'll be honest with you, for years, but I usually run out of time. So, but because just that encouragement from some folks, I wanted to mention that. So the other type of tax, again, IRD tax, when you set up that retirement account several years ago, you filled out a beneficiary form, right? So maybe at your workplace, you filled out that or IRA or wherever, at your bank, wherever, but you filled out a beneficiary form. And let's say you and I, or not you and I, let's say I pass away this year, okay? And my retirement account, when my beneficiary goes to that organization, and by the way, retirement accounts have a beneficiary form. Whoever has that account for you, they're not going to look at your will. They're going to that beneficiary form. So anything with a beneficiary form usually bypasses the will, okay? That's real important. And so, I encourage folks every few years, make sure your beneficiary form's up to date, because that's what's going to rule. That's what's going to govern it, okay? And so basically, I pass away this year. My beneficiary is going to go to who has that that retirement account, and they're going to start pulling money out. When they start pulling money out, again, the government doesn't forget it hadn't been taxed, right? So they owe tax on it, whatever they start pulling out. So let me give you a case study related to this. So I had a couple that I met with at one point. They said, Jeff, we have our daughter that we want to benefit significantly through our state. And we have 5 ministries, including the church, that they wanted to help. And they said, Jeff, by the way, we don't want to owe a penny of tax. We don't want our estate to owe any tax. We don't want our heirs, our daughter to owe any tax. What are our options? So what we ended up doing is the beneficiary on their retirement accounts that they have is whom? It's those ministries. Because ministries are nonprofits that don't pay tax. Okay? So those ministries are the beneficiary on that, I think it was IRA that they had. And then everything else, the house, everything else is going to the daughter. And unless Congress does something really weird over the next few years, they've erased every penny of tax, right? That's powerful. And so I like to look at it like this. When you and I get to go to heaven one day, there's only 3 buckets we can give to. 3 buckets. Bucket number 1 is individuals. We can give away to any individuals we want to give to. You know, friends, family, guess you could throw enemies in there, but any individual, okay, you want to benefit, right? Second bucket is basically called nonprofits, like our church and other ministries we want to benefit one day. We want to leave impact. We want to leave legacies. Third bucket is what? What's third bucket? Tax, government. Okay, those are the only 3 ways you can leave assets one day through your will. So, or through beneficiary forms. So what I encourage folks to do is to think about, how do I minimize the tax, unless that's a good thing, and how do you maximize what your family as well as the kingdom's receiving, right? And so these are a very effective way to do that, those beneficiary forms. That's an easy way, all for retirement accounts, to benefit the ministries, and then with at least part of that, and then everything else to family. I've seen folks do that pretty often. And so I'm going to, let's see here. I need to wrap up pretty soon here. So part of the will, again, we get to think about who we want to benefit, family members, others. I had a lady that told me at one point, she said, Jeff, I've had this neighbor, I think she said for 41 years. And this neighbor has helped me through some pretty tough stuff in life. And I want her to benefit through my will. And can I put her in my will, she asked. I said, absolutely. You know, again, that's part of our privilege, is we get to do that. On your church, you know the importance of your church on the impacting this community with the gospel message and what it's meant on your own life, as far as other ministries that you may want to benefit as well. So, I accidentally gave away the answer here. I was going to tell you that the national average for the amount of time that it takes for every penny of an inheritance to be spent, okay, whether that's $1, whether that's $10 million, but every penny of an inheritance to be spent by an individual, the national average is right there, 1.5 years. And I was actually teaching this session at a church in Kerrville, Texas, down by San Antonio area a few years ago. And a guy stood up in the middle of when I was speaking. And, Pastor Clay would probably attest to this as well. But when you're teaching or preaching or whatever, and somebody stands up in the middle, you don't know what's coming next, right? And so he stood up, this guy. And he said, Jeff, I got to say something. I said, feel free. And he said, I know the answer to that. And I had not put the number on the screen, okay, then. And he said, I've got to say something. I said, the answer to that for me is 18 months, because that's how long it took me to spend my parents' inheritance. So you probably know where I'm going with this. But what if you could leave part of your estate that would have a perpetual impact on the kingdom of God? I encourage folks to, and I get a little passionate about it because I could see behind the scenes. Folks benefiting their family in a significant way, but also the kingdom, or churches and other ministries. And part of what the foundation can do for you and potentially add value to you is the foundation, your foundation, Louisiana Baptist Foundation. We can help you get documents done. If it's a basic will, that's all people need 95% of the time. It's not complex. And we have a different process, by the way, for complex scenarios. But for 95% of the time, all people need is a basic will, and it's free. It's free. I mean, we take care of it in our budget. The only requirement that we have is that at least 10% benefit the kingdom in some way, your church or other ministries. We're neutral on that, as long as it benefits the kingdom. And so we get to work with folks, again, just about on a daily basis to help them get their documents done, again, for free, And so that's part of what we can do for you to potentially add some value to you. So what I want to do is I need to finish up pretty quickly here. So, again, when you and I get to go to heaven one day, there's only 3 buckets we can give to, right? First bucket is what? Individuals, right? Any individual we want to benefit one day. Family, friends, again, somebody in the room, whoever, right? And second bucket is what? Churches and ministries we want to have an impact on with our, and show our values. Third bucket is government tax. So one of the things I want to encourage you to do is how do you minimize the tax, unless you think that's a good thing. And then how do you maximize what your family as well as the kingdom's receiving. And so whether you have a will or not, I encourage you to kind of think through that and just plan appropriately related to from a stewardship item. I have the honor to often be in churches and love to do it. Now, there are a couple of folks that could help me hand out some forms here. There's some folks that might could help me. I appreciate it. Thank you. I have the honor, again, to be speaking quite a bit, and thank you so much. I have the honor to speak, and one of the things I'm doing is I'm constantly tweaking and changing this presentation, okay? And if you're thinking, well, Jeff, I wish you would have covered this, X, Y, Z. Please put that on there because it helps me, okay, as I'm in other churches. Also, if you want more information, there's a gray box. When you receive one of these, there is a gray box that if you want more information, we can help you with that. And remember, we are a free resource to you. Very private, very confidential. That's just part of our ministry. And so what I want to do, if you can help us with that, if there's anything you need as far as information, just check that box. We have people writing questions in the lines there. If you want more information, please let us know, email or phone, so we can just follow up with you, okay? And my assistant over the next day or two will follow up just to see, schedule a time, a phone meeting that we can get you what you need, okay? So I want to pause for like 2 minutes, and if you can help us with these, that'd be great. Who else needs one in the room? There's one back there. But we're just going to pause for a couple of minutes, and then I'll close us out in prayer. Just a few. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks. So like I said, I'm just going to pause for a couple of minutes, and then if you can help us with that, we'll close out in prayer. Thank you. We'll just take one more minute. Feel free to take as much time as you need. We'll have a little bit more time between now and the worship service at 10:30. And so feel free to take as much time as you need. But if you do me a big favor with those, because we will have a limited amount of time between the two, between Sunday school and worship. If you can do me a big favor, in those forms, do you mind just putting them face down right up here? I realize some of it's private information. If you can just put them face down. And be glad to help in any way. We sincerely, Louisiana Baptist Foundation, we love what we do. And just working with great folks all around the state. And So thank you for the honor to be with you this morning. Again, I've been looking forward to it, and just thanks so much for the time. And I really do hope the information has been helpful to you and will be helpful to your family as well as God's kingdom one day. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. God, we are so grateful for how much you love us. Lord, thank you for the honor to be in your house today. And Lord, I pray, as I did to you earlier this morning, that you'd use information to help folks and their families and your kingdom, God, and in coming days. And God, I pray for the time of worship that will start in a little bit. God, I pray that every word that is sung, every word that is said, everything that's done in this place today, God, I pray that it would bring you glory. I pray that it would be joyous to your ears, how we worship you. In Jesus' name, amen. So, thank you all so much.